Grizzly bear attacks are among the wild's most brutal and unpredictable encounters. These apex predators, weighing over 700 pounds, can sprint faster than a horse and react with terrifying force when provoked or even surprised. From dense forests to frozen tundras, one wrong step in their domain can turn fatal in seconds. Whether you're a hiker, hunter, or researcher, no amount of preparation guarantees safety when a grizzly charges. This video reveals 6 terrifying bear encounters, from a helicopter crash ambush to a polar bear tearing into a tent. The Amur region of far eastern Russia had always been notorious for its unforgiving wilderness and dense grizzly bear population. Stretching across thousands of square kilometers of pristine taiga forest, the region served as one of the last strongholds for the Eurasian brown bear, with some specimens reaching weights of over 600 kilograms. The area's remoteness made it a sanctuary for wildlife and a treacherous workplace for the forestry crews who ventured into its depths. On June 24, 2025, veteran pilot Dmitry Volkov prepared his chartered Mi-8 helicopter for what should have been a routine transport mission. His passengers were a 6-member forestry survey team tasked with assessing timber quality in a remote area of the Amur wilderness. The team leader, Alexei Morozov, had worked these forests for over 15 years and knew the risks that came with the territory. His crew consisted of experienced foresters, Yekaterina Petrov, Boris Fedorov, Ivan Kuznetsov, Sergei Volgin, and newcomer Natasha Orlov, who had joined the team just 3 months prior. The morning had started clear, but ominous clouds began gathering on the horizon by mid-afternoon. Weather reports indicated a sudden storm system moving in faster than anticipated, but Volkov decided they had enough time to complete the drop-off before conditions deteriorated. The helicopter lifted from the base camp at 2:30 p.m., carrying the team toward their designated survey area deep in bear country. Morozov briefed his team on standard bear safety protocols as they flew over the endless canopy of birch and pine. The Amur region was home to some of Russia's largest and most aggressive grizzlies, animals that had learned to associate human activity with potential food sources. He reminded them that bears in this area had been known to investigate crash sites, drawn by the scent of fuel, food supplies, and injured humans. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity just as they approached the landing zone. Violent winds buffeted the helicopter, while torrential rain reduced visibility to mere meters. Volkov fought to maintain control as lightning illuminated the turbulent sky around them. A sudden downdraft caught the aircraft, slamming it toward the forest canopy with devastating force. The Mi-8 crashed through the tree line, its rotors shearing off branches before the fuselage slammed into a small clearing with a bone-jarring impact. The main rotor assembly broke apart on impact, sending twisted metal fragments across the crash site. Volkov was killed instantly when the cockpit collapsed, but remarkably, all 6 forestry team members survived the initial crash, though several sustained serious injuries. Morozov regained consciousness first, his left arm broken and blood streaming from a head wound. Around him, his team members were in various states of injury and shock. Petrov had suffered a severe leg fracture, while Fedorov appeared to have internal injuries and was coughing up blood. Kuznetsov and Volgin had managed to escape with minor cuts and bruises, but Orlov remained unconscious with what appeared to be a serious head injury. As the survivors attempted to assess their situation and tend to their wounds, the distinctive smell of aviation fuel and the metallic scent of blood began permeating the area. Morozov knew these odors would travel far in the humid forest air, potentially attracting the predators he had warned about just hours earlier. The first sign of trouble came 2 hours after the crash. When gathering emergency supplies from the wreckage, Kuznetsov suddenly froze and pointed toward the tree line. A massive male grizzly, easily weighing over 500 kilograms, had emerged from the forest and approached the crash site methodically. The bear's keen sense of smell had led him directly to the scene of destruction. Morozov immediately ordered his mobile team members to make noise and try to appear large, hoping to discourage the animal's approach. They shouted, banged metal fragments together, and waved their arms, but the massive grizzly showed no signs of retreat. Instead, the commotion seemed to agitate the animal further, and it began displaying aggressive behavior, swaying its head and huffing loudly. When the bear closed within 30 meters of the wreckage, Volgan found the helicopter's emergency flare gun among the scattered equipment. He fired a flare directly over the grizzly's head, hoping the bright light and noise would frighten it away. The bear reared up on its hind legs, standing nearly 3 meters tall, then dropped back down and charged directly toward the group of survivors. The attack was swift and brutal. The grizzly first targeted Fedorov, who was unable to move quickly due to his internal injuries. The bear's massive paws struck him repeatedly, while its powerful jaws inflicted severe wounds to his torso and neck. Morozov and Kuznetsov attempted to drive the animal away, using broken helicopter parts as makeshift weapons, but their efforts only redirected the bear's fury toward them. The grizzly turned on Morozov next, delivering crushing blows that shattered several of his ribs and punctured his lung. As the team leader collapsed, gasping for breath, Volgan fired another flare, striking the bear directly in the shoulder. The animal roared in pain and fury, but continued its assault, turning its attention to Petrov, who lay helpless with her broken leg. Kuznetsov and Volgan, recognizing that their injured teammates were being systematically attacked, made the desperate decision to flee into the forest. They dragged the still unconscious Orlov between them, leaving their critically wounded colleagues behind as the enraged grizzly continued its rampage. The 3 survivors spent the next 18 hours hiding in the dense underbrush, listening to the sounds of the bear destroying what remained of their equipment and supplies. Aligned by the helicopter's emergency beacon, search and rescue teams finally reached the crash site the following morning. They found Fedorov dead from his injuries, while Morozov and Petrov had sustained life-threatening wounds but were still alive. Regional wildlife officials later confirmed that the attacking bear was a dominant male known to local rangers, an animal that had previously shown aggressive behavior toward humans in the area. The combination of the crash site's strong odors, the survivors' injuries, and the bear's territorial nature had created a perfect storm for the tragic encounter. Morozov spent 3 months recovering from his injuries, but eventually returned to forestry work, though he never ventured into the remote Amur wilderness again. The incident prompted new safety protocols for helicopter operations in bear country, and highlighted the extreme dangers those working in Russia's most remote and wild regions face. Kodiak Island, Alaska, over 9,000 square kilometers, is known for its dense wilderness and the world's largest brown bears. These 680-kilogram bears evolved in isolation and are highly territorial and unpredictable around humans. In September 2019, 38-year-old fisherman Jeremiah Blackwood, a seasoned veteran of Kodiak's waters, worked the lucrative near-shore crab beds despite the risks. His 22-foot northern hunter skiff was built for solo runs in the island's harsh conditions. Over the years, Blackwood established a routine that maximized his catch and safety. He would arrive at his preferred fishing spot just after dawn, when bears were typically less active, and complete his trap hauling before the animals emerged for their evening feeding. His area was particularly productive, near a salmon stream where bears frequently came to feed, but he had never encountered one of the massive predators at such close range. This morning, thick fog blanketed the coastal waters, reducing visibility to less than 50 meters. Blackwood navigated by GPS to his crab trap locations, a series of markers he had worked for the past 3 seasons. The fog created an eerie silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against his boat's hull and the occasional call of seabirds invisible in the gray murk. As he approached his 3rd trap location, roughly 200 meters from shore, Blackwood began hauling the heavy steel cages from the ocean floor. His hydraulic winch groaned under the weight as the first trap broke the surface, revealing a promising catch of Dungeness crab. He was so focused on securing the trap and sorting his catch that he failed to notice the massive brown shape moving through the fog toward his boat. The Kodiak bear had been feeding on a dead whale carcass that had washed ashore during the previous night's storm. The massive male, weighing nearly 600 kilograms, had claimed the valuable food source and fiercely protected his prize. When Blackwood's winch echoed across the water, the bear interpreted it as a potential threat to his feeding area. Without warning, the enormous bear crashed through the shallow water near the shoreline and began swimming directly toward the fishing boat. Blackwood first spotted the animal when it was less than 30 meters away, its massive head cutting through the water with surprising speed. The fisherman had encountered bears on land before, but seeing one of these apex predators swimming in open water was a terrifying revelation of their true capabilities. Blackwood immediately abandoned his crab trap and lunged toward the boat's steering console, desperately trying to start the outboard engine. Panicked, he flooded the motor on the first attempt, leaving him stranded as the massive bear closed the distance. The Kodiak reached the boat within seconds, its powerful claws scraping against the aluminum hull as it attempted to climb aboard. The bear's initial assault was devastating. Its massive paws, equipped with claws over 10 centimeters long, raked across the boat's gunwale, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Blackwood grabbed his emergency flare gun from the safety kit, hoping to drive the animal away with the bright pyrotechnic display. He fired the first flare directly over the bear's head, but the massive predator became even more aggressive instead of retreating. The Kodiak reared up against the side of the boat, its enormous weight causing the small vessel to list dangerously toward the water. Fishing equipment was scattered across the deck as Blackwood fought to maintain his balance. He fired a second flare, this time striking the bear in the shoulder, but the animal's thick fur and hide absorbed most of the impact. Growing increasingly furious, the bear began systematically destroying everything within reach. It shredded the boat's canvas cover, smashed the radio equipment, and sent Blackwood's expensive crab traps tumbling into the ocean. The fisherman retreated to the bow, clutching his remaining flares while the massive predator dominated the stern of his vessel. In a final, devastating assault, the Kodiak threw its full weight against the boat's side, nearly capsizing the small craft. Blackwood was thrown into the frigid water as his boat tilted beyond its recovery point. The shock of the 45-degree water immediately began sapping his strength as he clung to floating debris from his destroyed equipment. Having established its dominance over the perceived threat, the bear gradually lost interest in the destruction it had caused. It swam back toward shore, leaving Blackwood floating among the wreckage of his livelihood. The fisherman managed to grab onto his boat's emergency flotation device, but hypothermia was already setting in as he drifted in the harsh Alaskan waters. Captain Maria Santos of the commercial vessel Pacific Dawn spotted the debris field nearly 4 hours later. Her crew pulled the semi-conscious Blackwood from the water, his core body temperature dangerously low and his exposed skin showing early signs of frostbite. The rescue team also recovered what remained of his fishing equipment, though most of his expensive gear had been lost to the depths. Wildlife biologists later confirmed that the attacking bear was a well-known dominant male who had been tagged and monitored for several years. The animal's aggressive behavior was attributed to its defense of the whale carcass, a valuable food source that could sustain a bear for weeks. Officials noted that such encounters were becoming more common as fishing operations moved closer to prime bear feeding areas. Blackwood recovered from his injuries after several weeks of treatment for hypothermia and exposure. However, the psychological impact of the encounter proved more lasting than his physical wounds. He eventually returned to commercial fishing, but never again worked alone in waters close to Kodiak's bear-populated shorelines, recognizing that he had been fortunate to survive an encounter with one of nature's most formidable predators. Alaska's Chugach Mountains, spanning over 20,000 square kilometers, are a remote haven for trophy elk, deer, and massive grizzlies, where wildlife encounters are inevitable. In October 2017, veteran guide Marcus Thornfield led an ambitious elk hunt into an unexplored part of the range. With over 20 years of experience, he assembled 15 seasoned hunters, including 42-year-old Garrett Hendricks, a petroleum engineer from Texas who had long saved for this dream expedition. Hendricks had been hunting since childhood and considered himself well prepared for the challenges of the Alaskan wilderness. He had invested in top-quality equipment, including a custom .300 Winchester Magnum rifle and the latest cold weather gear. However, despite his extensive hunting experience in Texas and Colorado, nothing had prepared him for the unique dangers of Alaska's massive grizzly bear population. The hunting party had established their base camp in a valley known for its high concentration of Roosevelt elk, a subspecies that could weigh over 500 kilograms. Thornfield had chosen this location because recent scouting reports indicated a large bull elk in the area. Still, he knew that the same habitat that attracted elk also drew grizzly bears preparing for winter hibernation. On the morning of October 15th, Thornfield divided his clients into smaller groups to cover more territory while maintaining safety protocols. Hendricks joined a stalking party of 8 hunters, accompanied by 2 guides, as they pursued fresh elk tracks leading up a steep, brush-covered slope. The remaining 7 hunters and guides took positions at strategic observation points throughout the valley, creating an extensive network of eyes and ears across the hunting area. The elk tracks led the hunting party through increasingly dense vegetation, a mixture of alder thickets and devil's club that provided perfect cover for wildlife. Thornfield repeatedly reminded his clients about the importance of making noise to avoid surprising any bears that might be feeding in the area. Still, the hunters tried to remain quiet enough not to spook their quarry. As the morning progressed, the stalking party spotted a magnificent bull elk approximately 300 meters ahead, partially obscured by the thick undergrowth. Hendricks, who had drawn the first shooting opportunity, began carefully positioning himself for what he hoped would be the perfect shot. The other hunters and guides spread out behind him, creating a semicircle that would give them clear sight lines while maintaining safe shooting angles. Unknown to the hunting party, a massive male grizzly bear had been feeding on a moose carcass less than 50 meters from their position. The dense brush had completely hidden the bear, which weighed nearly 400 kilograms and stood over 2 meters tall at the shoulder. The animal had claimed the carcass 2 days earlier and was aggressively defending its valuable food source from any perceived threats. As Hendricks crept forward to get a clearer shot at the elk, he inadvertently moved directly between the hidden grizzly and its kill. The bear, already on edge from protecting its meal, interpreted the hunter's approach as a direct challenge to its claim. The massive predator had been watching the human intruders for several minutes, growing increasingly agitated by their presence in its territory. The attack came without warning. The grizzly exploded from the brush with terrifying speed, covering the distance to Hendricks in less than 3 seconds. The hunter, focused entirely on the elk ahead of him, had no time to react before the massive bear struck him with devastating force. His rifle, which had been ready to fire at the elk, discharged harmlessly into the air as he was knocked to the ground. The 15 witnesses to the attack would later describe the scene as something from a nightmare. The grizzly's initial charge knocked Hendricks off his feet, and the bear immediately began mauling the helpless hunter with its powerful jaws and razor-sharp claws. The animal's aggression was unlike anything the experienced guides had ever witnessed, suggesting that the bear was not just defending territory, but was actively intent on eliminating a perceived threat. Thornfield and his fellow guide began shouting at the bear while several hunters raised their rifles. Still, the speed and violence of the attack made it impossible to get a clear shot without risking hitting Hendricks. The bear's massive body completely covered the fallen hunter, and its frenzied movements made precision shooting extremely dangerous. 2 hunters managed to deploy bear spray, but the wind carried most of the irritant away from the attacking animal. Others fired warning shots into the air, hoping to startle the grizzly, but the deafening noise only seemed to increase the bear's aggressive behavior. The entire attack lasted less than 2 minutes, but the witnesses would later describe it as feeling like an eternity. When the bear finally retreated into the brush, Hendricks had sustained massive trauma to his chest, neck, and head. Despite immediate first aid from the guides and several hunters with medical training, the injuries proved fatal. The hunter died at the scene, surrounded by his fellow outdoorsmen who had been powerless to prevent the tragedy. The surviving hunters and guides spent the next 6 hours carefully evacuating Hendricks' body from the remote location while maintaining constant vigilance for the aggressive bear. Alaska authorities and wildlife officials arrived by helicopter that evening, beginning an investigation that would ultimately determine the attack was a case of a territorial bear defending a food source. Wildlife biologists later confirmed that the attacking grizzly was a dominant male known to researchers, an animal tagged and monitored for territorial behavior. The bear's aggressive response was attributed to defending its kill, the approaching winter hibernation period when bears become more desperate for calories and the large number of humans in its territory. The tragic incident led to new safety protocols for guided hunting expeditions in Alaska, including mandatory bear awareness training and requirements for larger guide-to-client ratios in known grizzly habitats. Dated by his client's death, Thornfield returned to guiding but never again took hunters into areas with known bear kills nearby. The 15 witnesses to Hendrix's death would carry the memory of that terrible morning for the rest of their lives, a stark reminder of the untamed power that still ruled Alaska's wilderness areas. Oregon's Cascade Range, stretching 1,100 kilometers from British Columbia to Northern California, is known for its wild beauty and recovering black bear populations. Yet few visitors grasp the delicate balance between recreation and these powerful predators. In August 2021, 32-year-old botanist Mia Blackthorne was researching wild berry ecosystems and how bears aid in seed dispersal. With 5 years of fieldwork in bear country, she had always avoided close encounters through careful planning and noise protocols. That morning, Mia worked in a section of the National Forest 50 miles east of Portland, Oregon. This region was known for its dense concentrations of huckleberry and blackberry bushes, which provided crucial late summer nutrition for bears preparing for winter hibernation. The Forest Service had documented significant black bear activity in the area, but encounters with humans remained relatively rare due to the remote location. Mia had arrived at her research site before dawn, hoping to document berry ripeness levels and collect samples before the day's heat made fieldwork uncomfortable. She had parked her vehicle at a Forest Service road terminus. She hiked nearly 3 kilometers into the backcountry, carrying her lightweight backpack with her scientific equipment, sample containers, and emergency supplies. The morning had progressed perfectly according to her research plan. Mia had located several pristine berry patches and meticulously documented the fruit development stages when she noticed fresh bear scat near one of the larger huckleberry stands. The droppings were recent, still moist, and filled with berry seeds, indicating that a bear had been feeding in the immediate area within the past few hours. Following standard bear safety protocols, Mia began making more noise as she continued her work, talking loudly and occasionally clapping her hands to announce her presence. She had been taught that most bear encounters could be avoided simply by making enough noise to avoid surprising the animals, who typically preferred to avoid human contact. However, as she rounded a particularly dense thicket of berry bushes, Mia faced a large adult black bear completely absorbed in its feeding. The bear, a mature female weighing approximately 140 kilograms, was systematically stripping berries from the bushes with remarkable efficiency. Both human and bear froze momentarily, equally startled by the unexpected encounter. The bear's initial reaction was defensive rather than aggressive. It stood on its hind legs to get a better view of the potential threat, swaying slightly as it tried to process the scent and appearance of the human who had invaded its feeding area. Mia remained motionless, remembering her training about avoiding sudden movements that might trigger an attack response. Unfortunately, Mia's scientific equipment bag chose that moment to shift on her shoulders, creating a rustling sound that startled the already nervous bear. The animal dropped to all fours and took several steps toward her, huffing loudly and clacking its teeth in a clear warning display. Recognizing that the situation was escalating beyond her control, Mia slowly backed away while speaking in a calm, low voice. The bear's behavior suddenly shifted from defensive to aggressive when Mia's retreat brought her closer to what appeared to be a daybed where the animal had been resting earlier. The female black bear charged forward with surprising speed, covering the 20 meters between them in seconds. Mia abandoned her gradual retreat and ran for the nearest climbable tree. Fortunately, a mature Douglas fir with low-hanging branches stood just 10 meters away. Mia reached the tree with the bear close behind her, its claws scraping against the bark as she scrambled up the trunk. Her research backpack caught on several branches during her desperate climb, but adrenaline gave her the strength to pull herself higher into the canopy. The black bear circled the tree's base, clearly agitated by the human's presence in its territory. It stood repeatedly on its hind legs, reaching up the trunk as far as its powerful limbs could extend, but Mia had managed to climb beyond its reach. The animal then began a pattern of behavior that would continue for the next hour, pacing around the tree, occasionally charging the trunk, and making aggressive vocalizations. From her perch 15 meters above the ground, Mia had an excellent view of the bear's behavior. She quickly realized this was likely a mother protecting cubs, even though she could not see any young bears in the immediate area. The female's aggressive persistence suggested she was defending either cubs or a valuable food source, probably both, given the rich berry resources in the area. As the minutes turned into an hour, Mia forced herself to remain completely still despite the uncomfortable position she had assumed in the tree's branches. Her field training had emphasized that movement and noise could prolong a bear's interest, while patience often resulted in the animal eventually losing interest and moving away. The bear's behavior gradually shifted from aggressive to merely watchful. It circled the tree with less intensity, occasionally stopping to feed on berries, while keeping one eye on the human trapped above. Mia used this time to assess her situation and plan her eventual escape route, noting the locations of other climbable trees and potential obstacles. After nearly 90 minutes of tense waiting, the black bear finally began showing signs of losing interest. It moved away from the tree to feed more extensively on berries, though it continued to glance back toward Mia's position. When the animal had moved approximately 50 meters away and appeared fully absorbed in feeding, Mia began her careful descent. The climb down proved more challenging than her panicked ascent, as she had to move slowly and quietly to avoid attracting the bear's attention. Her legs had stiffened during the long wait, and she had to pause several times to regain her grip on the rough bark. Each small sound she made caused her to freeze and check the bear's location. When Mia finally reached the ground, she remained pressed against the far side of the tree trunk for several more minutes, watching the bear's feeding behavior. She began her slow retreat toward the Forest Service Road when she was confident the animal was completely focused on the berry patch. The journey back to her vehicle took over 2 hours, as Mia took a circuitous route to avoid the bear's territory and stopped frequently to ensure she was not being followed. Her hands shook for hours after the encounter, and she constantly looked over her shoulder during the drive home. Wildlife officials later confirmed that the area had been frequented by a mother black bear with 2 cubs, though the young bears had been hidden during Mia's encounter. The incident prompted Forest Service officials to post additional bear warnings. It reminded researchers about the importance of carrying bear spray, even in areas with typically docile black bear populations. Mia continued her botanical research, but never again worked alone in known bear habitat, recognizing that her scientific curiosity had nearly resulted in a dangerous confrontation with one of the forest's most powerful residents. Established in 1872, this park in northwest Wyoming, extending into Montana and Idaho, covers over 8,900 square kilometers of wilderness. It's one of the last strongholds for around 150 recovering grizzly bears. Though millions visit yearly, few grasp the complex behavior of the powerful predators they may encounter on the park's vast trail network. In September 2018, 4 experienced hikers had planned an ambitious 3-day backpacking trip through some of the national park's most remote backcountry areas. The group consisted of trail leader Sebastian Wolf, a 45-year-old outdoor educator from Colorado who had been hiking in bear country for over 2 decades. His companions included marine biologist Dr. Rachel Cortez, mechanical engineer Timothy Ashford, and freelance photographer Luna Ravencrest, who had extensive wilderness experience but limited exposure to grizzly bear encounters. Their planned route would take them through the Thoroughfare region, often called America's most remote wilderness area. They would be more than 30 kilometers from the nearest road. This section of the national park was particularly attractive to experienced hikers, precisely because of its isolation and the high probability of observing wildlife in completely natural settings. The group had obtained all necessary backcountry permits and attended mandatory bear safety briefings conducted by park rangers. They carried bear spray, stored their food in approved containers, and followed established protocols for hiking in grizzly habitat. However, no amount of preparation could have predicted the extraordinary encounter that would test their patience and survival instincts. On their second day in the backcountry, the hikers followed a narrow trail through dense lodgepole pine forest when they emerged into a small meadow bisected by their intended path. Approximately 50 meters ahead, a massive grizzly bear had positioned itself directly on the trail, sitting calmly on a large boulder with an elevated view of the surrounding area. The bear appeared completely relaxed, occasionally grooming itself and showing no immediate interest in the approaching humans. Wolf immediately signaled his companions to stop and remain quiet while he assessed the situation through binoculars. The grizzly was a large adult, estimated at over 300 kilograms, with the distinctive shoulder hump and dished face profile that marked it as a mature specimen. Following established protocols, the group slowly backed away to a safe distance and waited for the bear to move on naturally. Park guidelines recommend maintaining at least 100 meters from grizzly bears and avoiding any actions that might be interpreted as aggressive or threatening. While remaining hidden, the hikers settled behind fallen logs to monitor the bear's behavior. As the minutes turned into hours, it became apparent that this particular grizzly had no intention of vacating its position on the trail. The animal occasionally stood and walked short distances around the boulder, but invariably returned to its elevated perch. Dr. Cortez noted that the bear's behavior suggested it was not simply resting, but actively monitoring the area for some specific purpose. After 3 hours of patient waiting, Ashford began expressing frustration with their situation. The delay was putting their entire hiking schedule at risk, and they had limited daylight remaining to reach their planned campsite. Despite warnings from his more experienced companions, he decided to take a more assertive approach to encouraging the bear's departure. Ashford stepped forward from the group's hiding position and began making noise, waving his arms and shouting at the distant grizzly. His actions immediately triggered a dramatic response from the massive predator. The bear stood upright on its hind legs, reaching nearly 3 meters in height, and swayed back and forth while huffing loudly enough for the hikers to hear clearly across the meadow. When the bear dropped back to all fours and began moving rapidly toward their position, Ashford realized his mistake. The grizzly covered ground with frightening speed, its powerful gait eating up the distance between the boulder and the hikers' location. Wolf shouted for everyone to group and prepare their bear spray while backing away slowly. But the bear's charge had already committed them to a confrontation. The grizzly stopped approximately 20 meters from the group, rising again on its hind legs to display its impressive size and dominance. Its behavior was territorial rather than predatory, but the message was unmistakable. The humans were not welcome in this area. Ashford, whose impulsive action had triggered the encounter, was closest to the agitated bear and directly in its focus. In a moment of panic, Ashford dropped his backpack and ran, abandoning his companions and triggering the bear's chase instinct. The grizzly immediately pursued the fleeing hiker, its massive frame moving with surprising agility across the uneven terrain. Ashford dodged the initial charge by diving behind a large fallen tree, but the bear's momentum carried it past his hiding spot only a few meters away. The massive predator skidded to a halt and spun around, clearly agitated by the chase, but not yet committed to a sustained attack. It approached Ashford's hiding place slowly, huffing and clacking its teeth in warning displays that every group member recognized as signs of extreme aggression. The engineer remained frozen behind the log, afraid that any movement would trigger a full assault. Meanwhile, Wolf and the other hikers had positioned themselves to assist without further escalating the situation. They deployed their bear spray and created noise to distract the grizzly from its focus on Ashford, but were careful not to make any sudden movements that might trigger another charge. The standoff continued for nearly 30 minutes, with the bear alternately approaching Ashford's position and retreating to patrol the area around the boulder. Dr. Cortez observed that the animal's behavior was consistent with a pregnant female protecting a preferred resting area, though the hiking season made actual denning unlikely. Eventually, the grizzly's attention shifted away from the hikers as it became absorbed in foraging activities near the boulder. The bear began systematically overturning rocks and digging for insects, behavior that suggested it was focusing on nutritional needs rather than territorial defense. This shift provided the opening the group needed to begin their careful withdrawal from the area. The hikers spent an hour carefully retreating from the meadow, rerouting to avoid disturbing the bear. They abandoned their planned campsite and hiked 5 more kilometers, arriving exhausted after dark. Park rangers later identified the bear as a radio-collared pregnant female known to biologists. Her behavior was typical. She sought a safe pre-denning spot, with the boulder offering a strategic lookout for threats. The encounter became a cautionary tale about the importance of patience when dealing with grizzly bears in their natural habitat. Ashford's impulsive decision to confront the bear had nearly resulted in serious injury or death. At the same time, the group's eventual success in avoiding conflict demonstrated the effectiveness of proper bear safety protocols. All 4 hikers completed their backpacking trip successfully, though the encounter left them with a profound respect for the power and unpredictability of the national park's grizzly bear population. The experience reinforced their understanding that in true wilderness areas, humans remain visitors in a domain still ruled by some of nature's most formidable predators. The Svalbard archipelago, between Norway and the North Pole, is a critical habitat for around 3,000 polar bears that rely on sea ice to hunt. As Arctic ice shrinks, polar bears move dangerously closer to human settlements. In March 2020, 34-year-old glaciologist Dr. Cornelius Whitehead set up a temporary research station on remote Nordøstlandet to study ice cores. After a decade of polar fieldwork, this was his first solo mission deep in polar bear territory. Whitehead's research station consisted of 3 interconnected structures located approximately 15 kilometers from the nearest research base. His food supplies were stored in a specially designed bear-resistant container 50 meters from his sleeping area, and he had installed motion-activated lights around the camp perimeter. However, climate change has created unprecedented challenges for polar bear populations. The sea ice that typically formed around Svalbard had been forming later and breaking up earlier each year, forcing many animals to rely on alternative food sources, including confrontation with humans. On March 18th, Whitehead awoke to his motion sensors activating repeatedly throughout the pre-dawn hours. As daylight emerged, he spotted a large polar bear approximately 100 meters from his tent. The animal appeared to be a mature male weighing over 400 kilograms, showing clear signs of malnutrition and stress. The bear's ribs were visible beneath its fur, displaying the desperate aggression of an animal that had not fed successfully in weeks. The polar bear had been investigating Whitehead's camp for hours, leaving tracks that circled the entire perimeter. Most concerning was evidence that the animal had attempted to access the food storage container, leaving deep claw marks in the reinforced steel surface. Severe weather conditions prevented any immediate evacuation, leaving Whitehead trapped with an increasingly aggressive predator. Just before dawn on March 19th, the situation escalated dramatically. The polar bear, driven by desperation and hunger, launched a direct assault on Whitehead's sleeping tent. The massive predator used its powerful claws and teeth to tear through the reinforced fabric, creating a gaping hole that provided direct access to the interior. Whitehead awoke to the polar bear's massive head pushing through the torn tent wall. Acting on training and instinct, he grabbed his emergency bear spray and discharged it directly into the polar bear's face and eyes. The capsaicin-based deterrent created an immediate and dramatic response from the massive predator, which roared in pain while thrashing against the tent's support structure. The bear's reaction was violent and uncontrolled. One powerful swipe caught Whitehead across the arm and shoulder, tearing through his heavy clothing and leaving deep lacerations that began bleeding heavily. Whitehead scrambled through the tent's rear exit despite his injuries, while the bear remained disoriented. He ran toward the main laboratory, leaving a trail of blood in the snow, while the polar bear destroyed his sleeping shelter. The animal spent nearly 2 hours systematically investigating the camp, displaying behavior suggesting it had no intention of leaving voluntarily. Whitehead huddled inside the laboratory structure, pressing emergency bandages against his wounds while maintaining radio contact with the main research base. His emergency beacon had activated automatically during the attack, but rescue operations would be delayed by deteriorating weather conditions and the bear's continued presence around the camp. As dawn broke, the polar bear's behavior became increasingly erratic. Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, Whitehead watched the massive animal methodically tear apart its sleeping quarters, searching for any trace of food. The creature's desperation was evident in every movement. This was not typical territorial behavior. but the actions of an animal facing starvation. For 6 harrowing hours, Whitehead remained trapped while the bear maintained its vigil around the research station. The animal would periodically approach the laboratory structure, testing the reinforced walls and leaving scratch marks on the metal siding. During these encounters, Whitehead could see the intelligence in the bear's dark eyes, calculating and patient despite its obvious distress. The rescue helicopter finally arrived during a brief break in the storm conditions. The pilot executed a dangerous landing, while the bear retreated approximately 200 meters, still unwilling to abandon the area entirely. Emergency medical personnel treated Whitehead's injuries, while security specialists used noise deterrents to drive the polar bear further from the landing zone. Whitehead looked down at his destroyed research station as the helicopter lifted off. The bear had returned to investigate the wreckage, still searching for sustenance that would never come. The image would haunt him for months. A magnificent apex predator reduced to scavenging human camps because its natural hunting grounds had melted away. The incident investigation revealed multiple safety protocol failures that had contributed to the dangerous encounter. Most critically, Whitehead's food storage container had been positioned too close to his sleeping area, creating an attractive scent trail that drew the hungry bear directly to the most vulnerable part of his camp. Additionally, his solo deployment violated recommended safety guidelines for polar bear territory during feeding season. The incident ultimately served as a stark reminder that climate change created unprecedented challenges for human researchers and Arctic wildlife. As sea ice continued disappearing at accelerating rates, such dangerous encounters would likely become increasingly common, forcing difficult decisions about the future of Arctic research and the survival of one of the planet's most iconic predators.